What looked like a typical jazz concert really wasn't, despite the elegantly dressed singers belting or crooning or improvising into the mic, backed by the classic jazz rhythm section, piano, bass, and drums. For many of the singers waiting nervously backstage, and for many in the audience, this was a totally new experience. It was the final night performance at one of the most unusual schools in the country, a summer camp in the Chicago suburb of Naperville, run by singer Janice Borla to teach the complex art of singing jazz. Many of the students in this class, who grew up immersed in rock and roll, today aspire to careers more reminiscent of the classic jazz singers, who were household names before most of these campers were even born. Some would-be singers were attracted by the recent success of a few highly visible contemporary vocalists. Singers like Diana Krall, Jane Monheit, and Norah Jones have been promoted with budgets and marketing pizzazz usually reserved for major pop stars. Some of their albums have sold in the millions. Those successes have helped give vocal jazz renewed popularity among listeners and a new generation of performers. But is that success good for jazz in general? Some fans wonder. With jazz making up only a couple of % of the music market, the music director at WBEZ Radio, a Chicago station that plays only jazz, says the art form is in crisis.
The real problem is connecting the music with audience. And that's where you see the struggle. In radio, in television, in newspapers, it has in fact largely vanished. And so the real question becomes, how do you keep an art form alive if it's not reaching an audience?
In that environment, the stakes are higher than ever for professionals like Tierney Sutton. She's been singing jazz over a decade. When Sutton went into a Los Angeles recording studio recently, she and the executives of her label, Telarc, hoped the album that would emerge, Dancing in the Dark, would break the 100,000 sales barrier and establish a new level of visibility for her. That goal would have been out of reach a few years ago. She says jazz changed after Diana Krall.
Diana Krall has had such phenomenal success, and she's a delightful singer and a very good pianist. And for people in jazz and jazz fans, it's very thrilling to see more people hearing these great tunes and hearing this music. At the same time, how she was marketed, which was as a beautiful woman, much in the same way that pop singing is marketed, made a shift in how I think the record business saw the potential of how you market jazz singers.
Janice Borla, a singer with 3 albums to her credit, started her camp long before Monheit, Krall, and Jones became popular. Existing jazz camps, she said, didn't have much to offer solo singers, especially on improvising. Now each summer's camp has a waiting list. The camp also features 6 evening concerts by the faculty of 4 veteran performers. One of those concerts is carried by the Chicago Public Radio station. All are sold out months in advance.
I think the American public is starved for singers, the singing of songs that were meant to be sung. I think that the reason why there seems to be a great popularity of jazz singers right now is that they're singing in a manner that's very accessible to a broad general taste, regardless of your knowledge of jazz. And I think the American audience is very grateful to have some singers back on the scene.
But will they connect to the jazz successes of the past? When we return, the newcomers learn jazz history from a man who was there when it happened. When students show up at the jazz camp on Monday, they have just 5 days to prepare for Friday's concert. The teachers know they can't teach everything that fast, and they can't expect perfection and polish. Students are encouraged to react to what others are doing at the moment they're doing it. Making up nonsense syllables and keeping the rhythm and some semblance of melody is known as scat singing. The campers try to make it work, inspired by the precise interaction between faculty members Floyd Standifer and Judy Niemak in concert.
Listen to this vocal. That's Diz. That's Bird. That's Charlie Parker playing the alto.
Students breaking into the jazz world learn that choosing a personal style is easier if they know something of what's come before them.
All of a sudden,
That's another place where Standifer comes in. With his daily lectures, he's the camp's one-man history department. At 74, he's lived a lot of what he teaches. He began his career playing with Billie Holiday. Jazz, he says, has exerted a strong influence on American music and reflects what's going on in the world around it.
what I'm pointing out to you now is all of these cataclysmic things that have happened cause changes in society. And when changes in society occur, the artistic and intellectual segments of society deal with it.
An example of that, he says, is World War II, which triggered big changes in popular music.
It's wartime. There's getting to be wartime. And what's happening is that you better live today, because tomorrow you may not be here.
Many students are so new that they've never heard the voices or even the names of some of those who preceded them. Names like Kenny Haygood.
Sound a little bit like Billy Eckstine? Sound a lot like Billy Eckstine. Why? Because Eckstine was the man.
But they're also introduced to new subtleties in singers they know, like Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan.
Sarah Vaughan would become the benchmark. She would become the standard by which jazz singers, between Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald, Anita O'Day maybe, these are the people who set the mark.
This is history with a beat, and Standifer says it teaches students they all owe something to the past.
The people who scat sing now are doing no more nor no less than what Louis Armstrong would have been doing, or what Bing Crosby would have been doing. Louis might have done something like that. Now you may get somebody standing on stage talking about. Now you say, well, what does that mean? To somebody, that's the same as Stardust.
But it sure doesn't sound like Stardust.
No, it does, but it gets the same job done.
I have had classical vocal lessons, but I was always just, drawn back to the jazz.
Some students, like Yvette Sellers, realize right off that the past is relevant to what they want to do today. She's a high school teacher who grew up in Columbia, and she's a little older than most of the students.
I listened to Louis Armstrong because he was wonderful at phrasing, and I listened to people like Sarah Vaughan because they could swing and they had the beats, and so they are examples for me. And then so I take from that and use that in my singing, or try to.
So your solo's Latin, but when the bridge goes, it's going.
Many younger students struggled to understand what they were singing about. Their songs for the upcoming concert were chosen for them by faculty, often standards that were popular long before they were born. Sarah Holman had to learn Love You Madly by Duke Ellington. She loves Ellington, but was having trouble scatting at first.
Improvisation! Just keep soloing. I know you didn't meant to.
Good things come to those who wait, so just relax and wait for fate to let me see the day you'll say to me, I love you madly.
It's like, you know, I don't have any specific reason to tell you, or, you know, it's not like I'm obligated. I just want to let this person know that I'm singing to, that I just love them with an undying mad love.
I love you, love you.
You know, the audience begs for like a grand ending. They want to know that there's a neat end. You know, so don't diminish it. Don't just think. Know what you're doing. Yeah.
I love you madly. I love you madly. I love you madly. Things come to those who wait.
As tough as it is for students to integrate spontaneity with technique, it doesn't get any easier for professionals trying for a hit record. More on that in a moment.
Tierney, go open your door and let the fly out.
The struggle to achieve musical magic isn't all that different in the studio than it is at the jazz camp. But because the stakes are higher, the pressures are greater. Tierney Sutton's new album was a tribute to Frank Sinatra, something that might sound like a romp in the park to create. But Sutton says it wasn't. Her first problem was that for her, Sinatra was an acquired taste.
I became a Frank Sinatra fan later than a lot of people. And it wasn't until I heard those ballad recordings that I became a Stone fan. So I wanted to take a piece of that music, maybe some of the songs that a lot of people haven't heard, and do some honor to them, if I can.
Sutton spent months immersing herself in Sinatra recordings. Then there were hours in rehearsal with pianist Christian Jacob, bassist Trey Henry, and drummer Ray Brinker. All this before they and the record's producer Elaine Martone assembled in the studio. But when the musicians began a take, it was time to forget the research and just react to what others were doing in the moment.
That's how deep it goes, if it's real.
Each time they recorded, they improvised, so each take was a little different. But there were differences that could affect the whole performance.
What the heck?
Something as subtle as just when to begin the ticking sound of a brush against a cymbal.
I think that it's more effective if the ticky-tickies come in on the second A section, or happy to be near you. What do you think? Yeah, I mean, we got a long way to go, you know? So we got to make the ride interesting.
That's how deep it goes, if it's real.
Now this
The process could have produced anarchy if the four musicians didn't know each other so well musically.
I felt I was by myself a lot, and so I end up playing too many notes because I'm trying to sustain the...
We always make jokes about the birthing process, you know, that it's not necessarily a clean process, and it certainly isn't an easy process, but it's a process that we've come to trust. And anybody that has a problem is going to be heard, because we know that if everyone's satisfied and everyone's content with it, it's going to be played with a commitment that won't be there if one of us just writes an arrangement and we all play it.
Have you ever listened to these? I have, actually, and she's got a wonderful smoky voice. So if you like this, you'll also like Diana Krall. She has a new album, Live in Paris.
Tierney Sutton has made 4 albums in the last 7 years. Each has sold better than the last. The record buyer at Borders says vocals are the albums that sell to people who buy only 1 or 2 jazz albums a year. That may account for the fact that in a recent edition of Billboard magazine, more than half the top 25 jazz albums were vocals. At the same time, some observers of the jazz scene say the popularity of vocals isn't doing much for the rest of jazz.
And so when someone like Norah Jones comes along and is marketed well, and she has a great voice, but it's not exactly jazz. But it was marketed that way in the beginning. And so you look at the figures and you say, look at the number of records she sold. We've got to run with this.
When you play Norah Jones on your station, what happens?
We don't.
You don't play her?
Oh, no, actually we don't. We're a mainstream jazz station, and that's what we play. We've played some Diana Krall, we play lots of vocalists, but I think our feeling was that was a line that we didn't feel comfortable crossing.
All right, well, so the food's not going to be here for a little while, so can we try Last Dance, Dancing in the Dark?
While Tierney Sutton says she's gotten work because of stars like Krall and Jones, she strives to maintain her independence and integrity as a jazz artist.
And when you're in doubt of what to do, you remember WWND.
What's that?
What would Norah do?
Norah would go to the bank.
This was for today. This is mainly...
At the jazz camp, Janice Borla sees a silver lining in the controversy over whether Norah Jones is really a jazz singer.
I think if the American public perceives that that's jazz, the best thing I can hope for is that they'll say, ooh, let's check this jazz thing out, and let's see who else is out there. And eventually they will hopefully bump into or discover other jazz singers who are really more in touch with what we have been talking about.
To get to that point and attract an audience, the students wrestle with fundamentals. 20-year-old Sarah Clare, who aspires to a performing career, had never heard of her song, Body and Soul, before.
Myself to you, body and soul.
At first, I thought it was a Torch song, that it was, you know, very big and brassy and out there. And then I was talking to another girl that is in the classes with me, and she's like, it's a love song, it's, you know, it's yearning. It's putting yourself out there and being like, this is who I am, and hear me, and fall in love with me, and I'm ready for you.
Just imagine that you're making just little floaty lines, you know? Just...
Once Sarah understood the story she was telling, she had to combine the spontaneous part of jazz with the part that takes work, practice, and individual technique.
It's very low. It's a very low song. And
you mean the notes are low?
The notes are low. It goes right down here.
That you turn away,
How's this little body do that?
How do you go from a soprano to the low part of Body and Soul? Show me.
I'm all for you, body and soul. I think that's even higher, or higher than I usually do it, but it's a pretty low song.
proud of myself.
Caitlin Miller has had classical voice training and plans to study theater in college. Her number was the technically demanding Night in Tunisia. She had never heard of it or its composer, Dizzy Gillespie.
And I'm singing A Night in Tunisia by Dizzy Gillespie.
Gillespie,
lo siento, in C minor.
The hardest thing for me about jazz is keeping it cool, is keeping it centered and unified in the center. Because jazz is not, that's not jazz, that's show music. But A Night in Tunisia is, it's very inward, it's very, this is what I'm giving to you right here, and I'm looking at it too.
This week is about discovery, about exploration, about being fearless, and that it's a work in progress. That's the most important thing, is the fact that this is the first performance of this tune that they've selected, and hopefully that they will be performing this from that point onward, and it will get better and better for them. But that this one is messy, but messy is good in jazz because it's process music, it's not product music.
It was the Vocal Jazz Camp's 5th and final night. Students invited parents, spouses, and friends to show what they'd absorbed in a week. Everyone hoped the magic would happen.
Most of them won't really pull it together until the performance. One of the students today really, for instance, really grew exponentially from yesterday. And I turned to Rosanna and said, she's like a little chia pet. We added water and overnight, she bloomed.
For the students, there was an extra challenge because many in the audience weren't already fans of jazz.
Don't you notice how hopelessly I'm lost?
Becky Cantlon had sung in a jazz chorus in high school. The camp gave her a new appreciation for how difficult jazz really is.
I've been in the theory class, the advanced theory class, and we were just totally immersed into this hard jazz theory, which is so over my head sometimes. But and I think it's a cool thing that jazz musicians make it look so easy.
Yeah. I found a thrill.
Her friend Olivia Stapleton, who had also sung with a chorus, discovered how scary solo singing can be.
If we do have a scatting solo within the choir, within the song, it's not like the focus isn't on you, it's on the group. But this is like you. And we get out there and we're like, I know this is a weird term, but we're like naked. We really are. We're just like giving everybody everything.
It's the wrong song.
Debbie here was different from the other students. She is just 2 years away from retirement. For years, she had wanted to sing with a jazz band.
Today on stage, for the first time ever, I did this. I just created. I created a whole different melody right on the spot.
Janice Borla says many students struggling with material they only learned a few days ago worry about being in control. But as Tierney Sutton has said, once singers are bitten by the jazz bug, they shouldn't be discouraged. And these days, with signs of a new audience interest in vocal jazz, students like Yvette Sellers are learning, experimenting, and planning to take part in the revival.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a fabulous fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray, I'm gonna feel the way that I feel today. 'Cause